Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about a risk that is encountered in the sport of falconry that falconers don't usually talk about. And whether you are a falconer, it's good to always remember this, or whether you're looking into getting into falconry, this is also good to remember. And so I hope this will be a useful video. If you haven't already, if you could please hit subscribe, I very much appreciate it. I am trying to keep this channel up and going and being a useful thing, and subscribing to it definitely helps. Now, when we're getting into this topic, I want to talk first about just a human phenomenon, and that is our desire to connect with wildlife, but particularly birds of prey. I have interacted with raptors since I was a little kid in a lot of different capacities, and I have friends in all different capacities that interact with raptors. And so I've seen that it's a little bit different. A lot of people like animals. A lot of people like to have a pet. A lot of people like to go to a zoo and see animals, or go to a national park or something and see wild animals. That's normal. Raptors, there's something unique about it. There's a lot of ways that people can and do find to have some sort of an interaction with raptors. And most of these people do not realize that underlying human, they're just like, I would like to interact with an eagle. They don't think about it from looking back at all humanity and seeing, oh, humans really do feel driven to try to connect with powerful animal symbols. I see it a lot with predators. People want to meet a tiger face to face, or they want to be in a project where they can help train cheetahs and rehab them back to the wild. Wolves, bears, birds of prey. All of these, and especially birds of prey, there's something special about them, not only in our time, but even in the ancient world. There was something where people wanted to reach out and have that connection. So in today's world, you see, for example, people will go volunteer at a zoo or an aviary and have the chance to feed or be close to raptors behind the scenes, or maybe in wildlife educators. Maybe they're like, hey, I'm going to be part of some organization like the Peregrine Fund, and I want to be part of their bird program and help actually hold and teach with birds of prey. You have wildlife rehabilitation organizations, and maybe people go and volunteer there where, hey, I'm handling these injured birds and helping nurse them back to health and having them, and of course, falconry itself, where you are actually getting licensed and you are training a bird and keeping it at your own home, and all of these things provide opportunities of different varieties for people to do that. And what I've found, all of these, by the way, there's different levels, but there's some things that you see in falconry that you don't encounter in those other versions, okay? So if you work at a zoo or an aviary or something like that, there's these birds in an enclosure, and that's it. You feed them, you clean up after them, and that's it. They're doing their thing. If you're doing wildlife education, probably an injured bird. Maybe it broke its wing and had to have a wing amputated. It can't go back to the wild, so it has its enclosure. You feed it, you take care of it, maybe bring it out, do a program, fine. If maybe you're volunteering for Hawk Watch, a bird banding group, right? So maybe you're on a ridgetop and you're trapping migrating sharp-shinned hawks that pass through, and for a minute or two, you get to hold one, and you see it, you photograph it, you weigh it, you measure it, and write that down and put a band on the leg and set it free. What it was doing before you were holding it and what it was doing after, you have no idea. It's just gone. You don't have to worry about any of that. That's where falconry is kind of different. Falconry is something where we are flying our birds in the wild. And so of everything I've listed, if you're volunteering for any of these groups versus being a falconer, 24/7, that bird is dependent on you to make sure you get the feeding right, the weight management right, the health right, and then when you're flying them in the wild, they are subjected to the wild. And that's part of what I want to really get into today that I think is so different and presents a risk. You, as a bird bander volunteering for Hawkwatch International, are not in any way, shape, or form worried after you set that bird free what's happening to it. You might wonder, but it's not on you. It's not directly connected to you. It flies over the next mountain over and gets shot or gets eaten by a bigger bird. You don't know. It's not on you. But in falconry, it's very strange because it's different. Now, I do wildlife education where I will have like a rehab bird or a captive bred bird that can't go back to the wild, and that's different than falconry. I'm using the same training techniques, but that bird is never subjected to the laws of the wild, which are very harsh laws. The falconry bird is. Because in falconry, we're not just keeping and caring for a bird, or you're not briefly having a bird and then turning it loose. You are keeping it with you and then letting it fly totally free. Maybe you've got a peregrine falcon that you take out and you let it loose, and it flies upwind and circles up thousands of feet and comes back over, and then you flush up a pheasant or a duck and it's chasing after it, and that chase might go on for miles. You might have to get out your radio telemetry and track them down. That's very different than just, hey, I'm at a school with a hawk that's missing a wing and doing a show. There are all kinds of things that can happen. One of the things lately this year, the bird flu seems to be quite high in numbers, and a lot of people have had experiences with that. What if your bird catches a prey item and contracts the bird flu from it and then dies the next day? These things can happen, and there are things that you don't have with these other interactions with raptors that you do have with falconry. So I want to talk about that, because there's a different angle that I see. All these other versions I kind of view as you are bringing that raptor into the human world. Maybe long term, maybe just for a few minutes, but it's like, hey, this is the human world. Hi, migrating bird, I'm from Hawkwatch. We trapped you. You're with us for a minute. You're subjected to our measurements, our photos, our bands, and you're gone. Or hi, injured bird that needs a permanent home. You're with us in the human world. We're going to bring you to schools. In falconry, even though you could say the same thing, because it is true, if that bird's living with you, it's in the human world. I get what you're saying, but I view it more the opposite way, that we are taking a step into their world, because you're trying to fly your bird as much as you can, and when it is flying, it's not attached to you. It's not in an enclosure. It's not on a leash. It's flying totally free. It's hunting. It's doing everything a wild bird would do. And there are risks that you would not otherwise have. I myself and other people I know have had birds, had falcons that were killed by eagles. I have had birds illegally shot by people where they don't see me and they see my bird flying and blam, blam, they shoot it, and then I'm like screaming at them and they run off, which is a felony here in the United States. I've had birds run into windows and break their neck and die. I've had birds land on power poles that were nowhere near where I was flying, and they go way over there and land. I'm like, no, and they get electrocuted. I've had so many things happen. I know people who have had birds hit by cars where they're chasing something, and then whatever they're chasing goes a different direction by the road. The prey crosses the road, and bird gets hit by a car. And if you don't understand the principle, you might think, oh, see, these birds had these tragedies because of falconry. It's not the case at all. It's actually the opposite. These are all things that wild raptors every day of their lives are subjected to. Wild raptors get hit by cars. Wild raptors get shot. Wild raptors get electrocuted and eaten by eagles. And so we are actually allowing a falconry bird, to be as close to a wild bird as possible and still be with us. But that means there are risks. And it can be tragic. It can be heartbreaking when you have worked so hard with a bird, they're doing so good, and some stupid thing happens, some fluke. Even with all your proper planning, thinking, preparing, even if you are practicing falconry right, the tragedies that happen in nature can and will still happen to your bird. And for some people, there are many falconers who get into falconry, they're practicing for a few years, and then they have a bad tragedy like that happen, and it just takes the wind out of their sails, like, I can't do this. And that's okay. That's okay. I had to take a step back several years ago. I had a gyrfalcon that was so cantankerous. She was hard-headed and stubborn. She was intelligent, but she was mean-spirited and nasty, but I loved her, and we had such success together. I worked for it, and it was so satisfying to have an understanding of each other that we ended up having so much success. She was my best hunting gyrfalcon ever, and one day she was eating her food in the summertime, and I had screens on my Mew, but somehow a wasp still got in and was climbing around her food and apparently stung her in the face, and she died. While she was bending down eating her food, the wasp was trying to eat the food too. It's like, really? You from a wasp. Now, that can happen in the wild too. You never know. And that was in my own property. It still happened with me trying to prepare and make sure everything was safe, and still had something like that happen. This is the truth of falconry. This is the nature of it, is that you're going to have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. If you do have, a falcon go fly upwind, go thousands of feet up, and then follow you around, you flush up a pheasant, they get it, that's breathtaking. It makes your heart rate go through the roof. You're excited. It's amazing to see. But if you're flying like that, as opposed to, well, I've got an injured falcon on a education permit that I walk around once in a while at shows that we teach, that's not going to take your breath away. It's still neat. It's still fun. It's still rewarding to have that kind of a connection with a raptor. But falconry pushes the limits of what can be experienced together with a truly wild animal and a human. But then you're going to have those lows. You're going to have a bird that might have a tragedy happen that very well would have happened as well if the bird was just flying out there wild. It is harsh in nature. And it's so harsh in nature. It's one of the interesting things I see, especially on drought years where prey numbers are low. I've noticed that people who get red-tailed hawks, kestrels, and some of these birds on years where prey numbers are low, that those birds train incredibly fast because they're like, wait a minute, free food? Cool, I still get to fly free, but no matter what, I get a free guaranteed meal. It's not just determined on if I found something to hunt. Even if I don't, I still get a meal. Hey, this is a great deal. They learn that very quickly. And same thing with a rehab bird or an education bird. But a falconry bird can build that trust so quickly, but you're still letting them fly free. So it's good to always remember that. There's a quote, I've said this in some of my videos too, but it's a quote I heard from a falconer friend of mine. I won't say his name because I didn't ask permission, but it's a quote he always uses, which is, when we die, our life will not be measured by the number of breaths we took, but by the number of moments that took our breath away. And I know that's a little bit kind of, chicken soup for the soul kind of thing, but it is true. And falconry, practiced, properly, practiced in a good way, gives you so many moments that truly do take your breath away. And it's exhilarating. But the price you pay is that somewhere along the line, if you're doing falconry long term, you're going to have a tragedy here and there. And they're tragedies that even if you do everything you can to prevent them, if you are having 1 foot in the human world and 1 foot in the wild, which is what falconry is, sooner or later, the laws of nature are going to catch up and you're going to have a bird unintentionally have a tragedy that is the same tragedies that wild birds experience. It has nothing to do with falconry. You are experiencing it because you have a foot in their world. And it will break your heart. But if you step back and see the big picture, you realize, hey, it's part of the up and down, the ebb and flow. That is the natural world. And even though it is harsh, it is a beautiful thing to see that at work. And we prefer to have more of those triumphs and more of those moments that take our breath away than those moments that break our heart. But I, for one, continue to practice falconry, even having had some huge tragedies in my falconry career, because I think the big picture, those other moments that are beautiful, that are breathtaking, are worth that price. They're worth the entry fee. So be aware, if you are getting into falconry, it's not just having a really neat pet. If you just want to have a connection, like I said, there are other ways to do it that don't subject you to those potential traumatic losses. You could volunteer for a zoo, for an aviary, for a bird banding group like Hawkwatch, for a wildlife rehab organization, for an education group like the Peregrine Fund. Any of those kinds of places, there's always opportunities to volunteer, and it's a lot easier to get into than falconry. But if you want to do falconry, remember, if you're doing it right, the rewards are through the roof, and sooner or later when you have a tragedy, it's of a deep nature that you don't have any other form. I mean, just losing a family pet or a horse that you've had for years hurts so bad, but it's a different kind of hurt. That wasn't a wild animal living a wild life and sharing it with you, and then an eagle flies and grabs your falcon and carries it away and eats it. You're just like, ugh. It's harsh. It's harsh, but that is the law of nature. And I think falconry is still very worthwhile to have that intuitive, deeper connection to a wild experience. So I hope that that thought isn't too depressing, but I think we should talk about it. I think we should normalize the acknowledgement that falconry is not just a connection to a wildlife. It's us being in their world, and therefore tragedy will sometimes strike. So let me know your thoughts down below. If you've had a sad experience or a sad loss that you feel like sharing with the community, feel free to let that know. Or if you have something you've learned from a loss that you can help the rest of us on here to watch for, to try to avoid, that would also be appreciated. But hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, happy hawking.